Okay, so first of all, planning is absolutely essential with this question, with creative writing pieces. You cannot afford to not plan. They even tell you in the question itself, we advise you to plan. For example, if you're driving and like you're driving in a new place and you've never been there before and you don't really know where you're going, you'd set up a sat nav, right? And you'd follow the road markings, you'd follow the signs to know where you're going. It's kind of like that. So if you were to like not set up the sat nav and you're just like driving blind into wherever, then you're not going to know what you're doing. You're going to keep making wrong turns, and then you're going to be like, oh, I'm going the wrong way, like about 10 times before you finally get to your destination. It's kind of like that with creative writing. You need to plan and have an idea of where you're going. Otherwise, you're gonna like halfway through realize that you've like fumbled and you've made like the most abominable waffle known to man on that piece of paper. And then it'd be kind of too late to go back because, you know, you've already spent half the time writing that piece of waffle. So now we go on to the question itself. So if you're doing AQA, then you're likely to see a picture which they ask you to describe, or a sentence which they ask you to use as a prompt for writing a story. I don't know if it's like that with other exam boards, but even if it's not, don't worry, this video will still apply to you. So if you have the picture and you have the sentence, always choose the picture, always choose the description over the story, because when you have description, there is more room for you to use the language features and the structural features and all of that, all the stuff that the examiners care about. And if you were to do the story, because you're focusing on, you know, a storyline and moving the story forward, there's less room for you to play around with language features, structural features, all of that, because you're focusing on creating a story. So that's really going to cap the marks for you. Next thing that you want to focus on in your plan is you need to have checkboxes. So you have to have checkboxes for your language features. So for example, like you would write down simile with a tick box next to it, then metaphor with a tick box next to it. And I'm not saying tick box metaphorically, I mean literally in your plan, put a tick box. And when I was like writing my piece, I would go back to the plan and I'd tick each one off in the little tick box to say that I've done it. Alternatively, you can just cross it out or something, but I don't know, I just found that the tick box is really satisfying. That's for language features. Do it for structural features too. So you'd have things like circular narrative, tick box, motif, tick box, flashbacks maybe, tick box, all of that. And you also have it for punctuation, because punctuations, like if you have different ones and you use as many as you can within your writing piece, it's going to really like help you vary your sentence lines, vary like the flow from one sentence to the next. And obviously it's ticking a box for the examiner, because they can say that, okay, this person's used like semicolons, they've used brackets, they've used hyphens. So it's a very, very good and well-developed piece of writing. So make sure you have a tick box for language features, structural features, and punctuation. So have like metaphor, brackets, colon, semicolon, hyphen, all of that. Next thing you need to do is you then need to choose a motif. Even before you start writing and planning on what you're writing, you need to have a motif. So this motif can literally be anything from like, it doesn't even have to be remotely linked to the picture. Obviously, it can't be like something ridiculous like feet or something. If you want to put feet, like, I mean, that's your call. But as long as you can link it back to the picture in some way, shape or form. For example, I've chosen for you guys a nice, gloomy, dark looking forest. Normally, when you're doing a creative writing piece in the exam, they're going to give you a darker picture because dark imagery provokes more interesting kind of ideas within your description. For example, with this dark, gloomy picture of a forest, I could choose the most random motif like water. And I could say that, you know, the forest itself is drowning in the emotions of the protagonist, or it's like in a whirlpool, it's swirling.
What are you talking about, man?
Amongst the waterfall of misery or something. If you have lots of words within there linked to your motif where it makes sense in the context of the picture and the description, then you can pull it off. The golden rules for choosing motifs is don't go for something completely remote. For example, feet. Okay, I'm looking down at the picture now. It's on my laptop screen, and I'm trying to think, how can I link a foot to the forest? I genuinely can't think of anything. That's what I mean. Don't go for something too remote. You can go for something a bit wacky and a bit abstract, like water, wood, I don't know, nature. I mean, that's kind of linked. Wind, I don't know. You can go for something abstract. Don't go for something too far-fetched, like feet. Okay, the second golden rule is make sure you choose something that is a bit more general. Don't go for something so specific. Like if you were to choose something like the, I don't know, the number 3, like in what way can you link the number 3 to the gloomy forest? First of all, that's remote, so it's probably not the best example, but that is so specific. Like there's very little room for you to play around and have these semantic fields with different ideas within them. For example, water is so broad, you can literally talk about anything. You can talk about the weather, you can talk about like drowning, waterfalls, sustenance, chemistry, all of that. Like a lot of stuff falls within water. So you need to keep your motif broad. Once you have your motif idea, write it at the top of your plan in like bold and then like underline it. I mean, you can't write it in bold because unless you're using a laptop. Underline it so that it's clear for you. And then when you're going through your writing, then you make sure that you include it and you use all the different words associated with it throughout your piece. Next step, once you have your checklist and your motif, is you write a storyline. So the storyline, it needs to be only a sentence long. It needs to be short, and it needs to be just the thing that's going to guide your piece. It's going to push you through your piece of work. So it shouldn't be something like really long and rambling, because if you want to make it long and rambling, then you need to choose the story, the sentence, the prompt thing at the beginning, not the picture. We're not choosing the story thing, we're choosing the picture. And with a picture description, you need to have something that's pushing your description along. Otherwise, you're just going to be stuck there rambling for about 3 pages long about a tree or something. You need to have a storyline that is pushing you so that you can go from one part of a description to the next, if that makes sense. For example, with the dark and gloomy forest thing, I'm going to put my storyline, and remember, it needs to be really short and snappy. It just pushes you along. The storyline will be a girl is walking through the forest, and then she goes and sits down in a swing. That is it. That is my storyline. So as you can see, like, it's really short and boring, but it doesn't need to be interesting and amazing, and it doesn't need to be a 500-page long novel storyline. It is literally the gas in your engine to propel you forward as you're describing the picture. Okay, and then the final step is you need to have your plan, as in what you're going to write in each paragraph. So I would recommend you write 5 paragraphs in your creative writing piece. So the first one is the above paragraph. So in the above paragraph, you're going to be describing the weather, everything surrounding the picture. It's outside of the picture. So normally it's the weather. The second paragraph is going to be dropped in. So you drop into the scene, but you're not like completely submerged in the action yet. You're just dropping in. So you're going to maybe describe the trees. You're going to describe the emotions of the trees, because you need to use like elements of pathetic fallacy and personification. That's going to tick some boxes for you. The third paragraph is zoom in. That's when you go into the action, the drama. In the zoom in place, that's when I normally focus on the protagonist. So for me, the girl walking through the forest. In the zoom in paragraph, I focus in on her. The fourth paragraph is going to be zoom out. So we're going to go back, we're going to backtrace, go back on our steps, and go focus on the forest again. And in this scenario, we can talk about what's changed. So obviously, if you were to just not change anything, you're going to be repeating yourself in the second paragraph. Zoom in, zoom out is going to be the same. You need to write something that's changed within your zoom out. So when you're zooming back out on the forest again, talk about how it's changed because of the presence of the protagonist now. The protagonist, the girl walking through the forest and sitting on the swing, she's innocent, she's sweet, and the forest around her has noticed her presence. And they've picked up on her sweetness, and they've picked up on her innocence, and it's sharply contrasting to the misery of the trees in the dark, gloomy forest, things like that. The fifth paragraph is leave. So this is when you go back out and you focus back on the weather or whatever you were focusing on in the beginning, in the above paragraph. And that way you've linked them together and it's formed a circular narrative. A side note to mention here is when you're planning your paragraphs with each one, you would mention, first of all, like a basic storyline of what's going to happen. So in my above, colon, I'm going to talk about the weather here. Like, the weather is like sad. I mean, that's really bad. The weather is like, depressed. It's drowning in tears or something like that. And then when you have like what's going to happen, the basic outline of what's going to happen within that paragraph, if you really, really want to go in depth, you can think about the pacing. So normally what I do when I'm planning my pieces, in the above and the leaving paragraph, I pace it like really, really slow. I make it so that the pace at which the reader is reading it is like really, really staggering, and it slows them down, so it gives them time to like immerse within the details. And to make things a bit slower, you'd use a lot more punctuation, so that it's like stop, stop like that, so it kind of slows the reader down. Then when you go into things like the drop in and the zoom in, you're focusing on the protagonist. That's when I start to speed it up a bit. I use less punctuation. I use more free-flowing words to kind of push the reader along and create almost like a breathless kind of experience. That's only if you really want to go in depth. You don't really need to do that. But I like to do that if I have like a bit of extra time to play with and I want to like really show the examiners that I know what I'm doing here. If you want to go really, really, really in depth, then you can think about the kind of sounds you're using within the words. So sibilants, assonants, and plosives. So plosives, you would use them a lot when you are talking about like impactful scenes. For example, I don't know, if the little girl, she sat down on the swing and she looked up and she noticed all the trees around her, they're kind of like, looming down on her. I'd use a lot of plosives there because that's quite an emotionally driven and tense scene. Because she's feeling intimidated, so I'd use lots of cur, I'd use lots of p's, b's, because they're harsh sounds to the reader, so they create kind of plosive, harsh environment within the sound of the words that you're using. And sibilants, you'd use that more when you're creating a more like hushed, beginning kind of atmosphere. So I'd use sibilants more when I'm describing the weather in the above and the leaving paragraphs. For example, like I'd use lots of s, like the hissing, hushing, all of that. that kind of like lulls the reader into like a false sense of security almost. It sounds really dark, but I love using like the dark imagery within creative writing pieces because there's so much to play around with. And yeah, that is pretty much it. That's how you would plan a creative writing piece to really set you up for success. I normally spend like 10-15 minutes planning my piece before I go into it, because when you have a really good plan, you know what you're doing, and then you're going to spend less time actually writing it because you actually know what you're talking about. So you're able to like flow from one sentence to the next, thinking, okay, next I need to go there, next I need to do that, next I need to like add some plosives here, next I need to add personification here. You know what you're doing, basically. If you go in blind, you're going to be like stumbling around, like how I said with the driving analogy. If you don't have the sat nav all set up, you're going to be taking wrong turns. You're going to take a lot longer to get to your destination. Anyways, that brings us to the end of the video. I hope you guys found this helpful. If you've got any exams coming up, good luck. You'll smash it. And make sure to use the method that I said in this video. Make sure to practice it as well. Don't just go straight in and think, okay, I watched the video like the night before, I know what I'm doing and I'm going to do it straight away. No, you need to practice it first, and you need to learn to get comfortable with it before you can implement it. Especially with English language and English literature, you always need to practice with those because they're such like, practice based subjects. Does that even make any sense? Okay, whatever, I'm waffling now. Anyway, bye guys.